This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, Honda introduces the ENY1. Toyota adds $7 billion to their EV plans. Hyundai wants to be a top EV maker globally, and more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 152 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. You may notice that I've published 2 episodes this week. This one, number 152, and number 153, about the announcement that Ford and Tesla made about their partnership. That was such big news this week that I decided to dedicate an entire episode to looking at all of the different angles that are involved with that news story. So definitely make sure you listen to that episode next. However, for this episode, I've got a lot of news stories to cover, starting with an article about a new EV from Honda. Honda has revealed its second fully electric vehicle, the ENY1, at its European media event in Offenbach, Germany. It is the brand's second EV to arrive in the region following the Honda E, and is designed to meet the growing customer demand for all-electric B-segment SUVs like the Peugeot E2008, Jeep Avenger, Hyundai Kona Electric, and Kia Niro EV. The ENY1 is built on Honda's newly developed EV platform focused on 3 fundamental attributes: a dedicated high-rigidity body structure, a low center of gravity, and carefully managed underfloor aerodynamics. In addition, the platform incorporates a lightweight 3-in-1 integrated power drive unit, electric motor, and gearbox. And this integration generates a maximum output of 201 horsepower and 228 pound-feet of torque. Under the floor sits a 68.8 kilowatt-hour battery. Honda says the DC fast charging capability can go from 10 to 80% in just 45 minutes. Expected efficiency on the WLTP test cycle should be roughly 3.7 miles per kilowatt-hour. Tom Gardner, Senior Vice President at Honda Motor Europe Limited, said, quote, "The ENY1 is the logical next step on our electrification journey in Europe. Our development philosophy blends intelligent, consumer-centric technology with beautiful design and fun-to-drive dynamics. This latest SUV exemplifies Honda's commitment to electrification and is the latest step on Honda's electrification journey," end quote. And while we aren't likely to get this here in North America, or at least there are no public plans that Honda has shared to do so, this should be a great option for any of my European listeners. Pricing hasn't been officially revealed, but it's rumored to have a starting price of around 30,000 British pounds. Next, there's a new Firetruck that is specifically made with fighting EV fires in mind. It's called the High-Load 6x6 Rapid Intervention Vehicle, or RIV for short. According to the company, the RIV uses an advanced high-pressure water delivery system with an abrasive suspended in the water that can cut through metal and inject water at over 4,300 psi inside the battery pack. So that allows the water to cool the battery cells directly, and that can really help address concerns of thermal runaway very quickly. Unlike alternatives, which currently use as many as tens of thousands of gallons of water and require hours of operation on site to monitor the battery, the Cold Cut Cobra Ultra High Pressure Lance, as they're calling it, can prevent cell propagation within 10 minutes using as little as, get this, 63 gallons of water. That's like filling up a bathtub or 2. That's really amazing, and is one of the technological improvements that I am going to be mentioning in the EV Fire series that I've been working on. And a quick aside, if you haven't yet listened to part 1 of that series, it was episode 150. Moving on, China's EV industry is bracing for a massive shakeout as the price war between major brands is ramping up. Encouraged by government policies aimed at bolstering the new energy vehicle industry, about 2/3 of China's existing EV makers were registered between 2018 and 2020. And currently, there are more than 200 different electric car manufacturers in the country, but projections are expecting that that number is going to shrink down to as few as only 10 brands. Currently, the top 10 brands in China by total sales in Q1 of this year were BYD with 550,000 NEV or new energy vehicle units sold, Tesla with 230,000, SAIC Motor with 140,000, GAC Motor with 90,000, and Chongqing Chang'an Auto, Dongfeng Motor, Geely Auto, Li Auto, FAW Group, and BAIC Motor filling out the top 10. Drivers in China have embraced EVs. More than a quarter of all cars sold last year were new energy vehicles. But experts say only EV makers with economies of scale and enough financial firepower are going to remain standing in the coming years. Partly driven by a drop in the cost of raw materials for batteries, Tesla began slashing prices last October, and very soon after, other EV makers followed suit. And makers of traditional petrol-powered vehicles joined the fray as they tried to clear inventory ahead of new emissions standards in China that will come into effect on July 1st of this year. Fat Zhang, founder of the China auto news outlet CNEV Post, said, quote, "These moves have led to a wait-and-see sentiment and have not helped in increasing vehicle sales," end quote. And He Xiaopeng, chief executive of XPeng, said last month, quote, "The elimination of players in the auto industry has just begun, and only 8 mainstream players will remain in the next 10 years, end quote. The next 4 news stories are all about Toyota. The company is investing even more money in their EV and hybrid strategy. The latest report is that they will be adding $7 billion to their already $30 billion investments through 2030. Toyota's strategy of spreading its bets when it comes to the future of cars was championed by longtime president Akio Toyoda. And I always emphasize "da" because it's a DA, not a TA like the brand is spelled. And Toyota's new president and CEO, Koji Sato, has largely stood behind his former boss's stance that high-margin hybrid vehicles are the practical way of generating cash now that can be invested later on in EVs. However, Toyota is still moving ahead with their EV plans, and last month, Sato said Toyota would release 10 new EV models by 2026 and form a new unit within the company to focus solely on fully battery electric vehicles. According to Toyota, the additional spending will help ensure it can achieve its EV sales targets for the current decade. One of the next EVs we might see from the company is a 3-row SUV by 2026, among the other EVs the company has planned, ranging from luxury vehicles to compact cars and commercial vehicles, to be sold mainly here in the US, but then also in China. Koji Sato re-upped the company's target of 1.5 million battery electric sales by 2026 as a base volume, and then said for battery supply that Toyota is going to, quote, "seek to speedily secure the necessary volume by increasing our in-house production capacity and collaborating with our partners," end quote. And although Toyota may be focusing more on EVs for North America and China, it's by no means pivoting its focus globally to them quite yet. It aims to boost its market share in emerging markets and Asia, and in a recent presentation, Toyota pointed out projections that in Asia, the hybrid market is expected to rise from 8% in 2022 to 21% in 2030, while battery electric models will rise from 5% by then from just 1% last year. As Toyota has argued in recent years, with limited supplies of lithium and other critical minerals, it can yield a larger reduction in overall emissions and likely a larger profit margin as well by producing hybrids rather than relying entirely on full battery electric vehicles. According to top scientists at the company, a lack of resources means that full battery electric vehicles cannot be the auto sector's only answer to climate change, warning that focusing on only BEVs could lead some drivers to hold on to polluting vehicles. Naturally, some investors and environmental groups have long criticized Toyota for being slow to embrace full battery electric vehicles, saying that it has lagged behind Tesla and others amid growing global demand. Gil Pratt, chief executive of the Toyota Research Institute, told reporters that BEVs could make a positive difference in reducing climate change in countries such as Norway, which has a lot of renewable infrastructure, but that in other parts of the world where coal is still used to produce power, hybrids were better for CO2 emissions, he added. Pratt has concerns over supply chains for EVs, saying, quote, "Battery materials and renewable charging infrastructure will eventually be plentiful, but it's going to take decades for battery material mines, renewable power generation, transmission lines, and seasonal energy storage facilities to scale up. And I don't necessarily agree with all of that, actually. I think there have been plenty of reports out that show even when a full battery electric vehicle is charged entirely on coal, which I don't think there's any place in the world where that actually happens. But even then, it is better for the environment when it comes to CO2 emissions. Honestly, Toyota is probably one of the few vehicle manufacturers that can get away with kind of hedging their bets on the technology that is best right now for moving forward. The Japanese manufacturing giant said that its operating income is going to grow 10% to a record 3 trillion yen, which is equivalent to about $22 billion or so at the current exchange rate, in the fiscal year through March of next year. The reason is a 10% recovery in vehicle deliveries as supply chains and semiconductor supplies normalize after all the shortages that we had. Profits might actually end up better than that. So the company, known for setting its expectations cautiously, gave no allowance for improving commodity costs, even though these posted a headwind last fiscal year and in many cases have reversed. So they can afford to lose money if they need to, but they can also afford to sell whatever they want that's going to maximize profits now while they're working on the research and development for full battery electric vehicles down the road. But then also their strategy gives them a perspective of just sitting back and seeing what technology works. In many ways, it will allow them to leapfrog some of the other, let's call it a battery electric vehicle experiments from other brands. You know, some of the brands that are out there trying their hardest. Well, Toyota is watching all of that. I guarantee Toyota is looking at it. I don't know. Maybe all of this helps explain Toyota's strategy, which is very different from the rest of the industries. While everybody else is making very much of going all in on full battery electric vehicles, Toyota still seems to want to be all things for all people. Toyota's stock has underperformed the Japanese stock market and local peers lately, and Julie Boot, an analyst at London-based firm Pelham Smithers, attributes the negative sentiment to Toyota's electrification strategy. But the company can still afford its broader approach, but it might not overcome investor doubts until it comes up with a compelling EV. And no, the BZ4X I would not put in that category. So this could be a few years off, though the company has said it will show a concept car based on its new approach this coming fall. But given the evidence so far, investors are right to worry whether being a jack of all trades will hold Tesla back from mastering the one most likely to dominate the future industry. Koji Sato's big task at this point is to prove everybody wrong. But Toyota is definitely going to have competition, and the competition isn't just sitting still. They're moving too, and Hyundai Motor Group, which comprises of Hyundai, Kia, and Genesis brands, is becoming very ambitious. They announced recently that they have an intention to become one of the world's top 3 EV makers by the end of the decade. CEO Jae-hoon Chang told CNBC, quote, "We are now developing 2 more platforms, and that will enable us to have 18 models by 2030. And we are aiming to achieve 2 million EV sales around the same time," end quote. Hyundai plans to introduce vehicles in 2025 based on its 2 new EV platforms, the EM and ES platforms, which are expected to lead to more efficient vehicle development and greater cost reductions. Hyundai Motor Group delivered 510,000 EV units last year, up 40.9% from 2021, putting it in 6th place globally. First place went to BYD, which delivered 1.87 million units, followed by Tesla with 1.31 million units. Volkswagen and Geely Automotive Group took 4th and 5th places, respectively. And while future plans from automakers are great to hear, and we need to know where they intend to go, certainly, and what they intend to do, but future plans don't mean that suddenly we have enough EVs now. And we definitely don't. We don't have enough right now. And a recent survey from the Sierra Club has determined that last year, in 2022, only 34% of all automotive dealerships in the United States had even one EV on the lot, and less than half of those who didn't have one were even interested in selling one, even if they could have gotten one. And naturally, EV availability varies by region, of course, but there's an interesting thing happening in California and the other 15 states that have adopted the zero-emission vehicle mandates that California has put in place. The ZEV states differ in how they will implement their versions of the various rules, but the important part here is that the laws set clear targets for future EV sales levels. States that follow California's Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, which was an August of last year update to the ZEV rules, for example, require 100% electric vehicle sales by 2035. So the ZEV states, therefore, are already expected to continue to be leaders in the shift to electrification. But the interesting thing is when the Sierra Club broke down its findings, it found that the dealer landscape was almost exactly the same in ZEV states and those without the future mandates. The nationwide number of dealers with an EV was 34%. In ZEV states, it was 35%. So where the ZEV states differ is actually not in having access to EVs or having EVs, but how they feel about selling them. Dealers with no plug-in vehicles to sell were likelier to wish they did have some if they were in a ZEV state versus the others. And while the national average was 44% that wanted an EV but didn't have it, that percentage was 52% in ZEV states and just 41% in the non-ZEV states. So in other words, while the supply chain and production constraints affected dealers nationally, the people it mattered to were in the states that said they would force more EV sales in the coming years. And regardless of where you stand on the politics and forcing businesses to do one thing or another, the fact that this survey by the Sierra Club is showing that ZEV states EV dealers want to sell them more than dealers in other states, I think is very enlightening. However, policy in states is definitely going to affect demand for electric vehicles and EV adoption overall. And one of the states that might see a potential slowdown is now Texas. EV owners in Texas are preparing to now pay more for their efforts to ditch the tailpipe. Governor Greg Abbott has now signed into law SB 505, which puts in place new fees for registering and owning EVs in the state. Under the bill, electric car owners will have to pay $400 upon registering their vehicle. Then, every year after, EV drivers will have to shell out an additional $200. Both of those fees are on top of the cost of the standard annual registration fees, which are $50.75 each year for most passenger cars and trucks. This law does exempt mopeds, motorcycles, and other non-car EVs and goes into effect starting on September 1st of this year. And this is an issue that, while it isn't new, seems to be more of a concern now as the number of EVs on the road continues to grow. In fact, one of the articles I'm working on right now is a full listing of every state and the extra fees and registration costs and taxes for electric and hybrid vehicles. And from what I'm finding, at least 32 states currently have special EV registration fees. And these range from $50 to sometimes many hundreds. But none of them have reached the level that Texas is going to at $400 and then $200 every year after that. Like many other states that have instituted EV fees, the reasoning behind the Lone Star State's new law is that electric vehicle drivers don't buy gas. Taxes on fuel, diesel or gasoline at the fuel pump, are the primary way that most states, Texas included, amass funds for road construction, maintenance, and other driving-related infrastructure. The bill's author, Republican State Senator Robert Nichols, in comments about the legislation, said, quote, "Currently, Texas uses the gasoline diesel fuel tax to fund transportation projects. However, with the growing use of electric vehicles, the revenue from the fuel tax is decreasing, which diminishes our ability to fund road improvements for all drivers," end quote. So there is definitely a solid reasoning behind this, but some of the thoughts that I've had are related more to vehicle weight and miles driven. Currently, I have not seen any program that actually follows along with how many miles you drive each year, and how heavy your vehicle is. Basically, to directly attribute any additional fee or tax to the actual use of the road and potential damage being caused. Take into account that a GMC Hummer EV, okay, it's the heaviest electric vehicle that I'm aware of that is for private sales, not a commercial vehicle. And it's over 9,000 pounds. That is going to affect the surface of the road much more significantly than somebody that would have, like the car I had, the Chevy Spark EV, or even some of the earlier Nissan Leafs that, they're not even 4,000 pounds. So if you drive 1 mile a year or 100,000 miles a year, you're obviously going to have a very different impact on the road around you as well. So that's just some of the thoughts that are in my head. What do you think is the best way to have EV owners pay their fair share for road use? Are registration fees the way to go, or is there a better way? I'm going to make that the question of the week. So I encourage you to head over to the EV Resource Patreon page and participate in the poll and leave a comment with your thoughts. I'll have more information on that in the question of the week segment. Next, Chevy hasn't started making the Silverado EV pickup truck yet, and they're already announcing improvements. Initially, they were talking about having the 212 kilowatt hour battery pack provide around 400 miles of range, returning a quick back of the napkin math of 1.88 miles per kilowatt hour. But now Chevy is announcing that the range should be closer to 450 miles, which, assuming that they haven't changed the capacity of the battery pack, simple math tells me that they're improving the efficiency of the truck to 2.1 miles per kilowatt hour, which overall, if you compare to every vehicle out there, yeah, that still is not great when it comes to EVs anyway. But keep in mind that this is a big, heavy truck. While I've been openly critical, and I'm not shy about admitting it, of the GMC Hummer EV, which uses the same battery pack and drivetrain technology, I'm taking a less critical position when it comes to the Silverado EV pickup truck, because my assumption, anyway, is that more people are going to be using this as a truck to tow and travel longer distances, especially if you're doing that while towing. Being able to go the distance becomes exceptionally important. So while I'm not a fan of big, inefficient vehicles, electric or otherwise, there are those that serve a purpose, like the Silverado EV pickup truck. Chrysler is stepping up talk about their future EV plans. They say their first fully electric vehicle will utilize the STLA or Stella dedicated EV platform from parent company Stellantis that is planned to offer 400 and 800 volt architectures. Additionally, with the company aiming to be the leader in advanced tech when its first EV launches in 2025, the Chrysler model could include level 3 autonomous driving capabilities, meaning you do not need to have your hands on the wheel. New Chrysler brand CEO Chris Fuel said that the SUV won't be anything like the Chrysler Airflow concept or even use the Chrysler 300 name, explaining, quote, "I don't think it's quite right for this product," end quote. And she hinted that they could still use the name for a future model, saying, quote, "It could be a great name for something that we bring out in the future. There is so much wonderful history and equity with the name, so I wouldn't want to rule it out for potential future use, but not for this one," end quote. One way or the other, I am thrilled to see more coming from Stellantis, whether it's Fiat, Dodge, Jeep, Ram, or in this case, Chrysler. Let's get more cars with plugs out there. All right, the second to last story for this episode isn't about cars, but it is about Tesla, so I'm hoping you'll let it slide. I'm including it because I think it's exciting. And honestly, that's all the reason I need, because if I'm excited, chances are you'll be excited too. Tesla recently shared a video update on its Optimus project, the humanoid robot that they're developing to make our lives less monotonous by the robot taking on a lot of the repetitive tasks like that we don't really want to do. Personally, to me, I'm thinking laundry, dishwashing, vacuuming, cleaning, dusting, all of those things around the house. But honestly, any progress is great to see. AI and robotics is changing so rapidly, and it's exciting to see this video that Tesla has put out of the Optimus robots walking, picking things up, and using various tools. And it's definitely something that you have to see, so I'll put a link in the show notes to the YouTube video. Okay, and on to the last story of the news segment, still about Tesla, but this time back to cars. Elon Musk shared that Tesla is working on 2 new products and guessed that Tesla will build more than 5 million of them a year once they're up to full production. And talking optimistically about Tesla's future lineup, Musk promised, quote, 2 new products that I think you will be very excited about, end quote. Still, he didn't specify what those are, other than to say that the design and manufacturing techniques of those products are, quote, head and shoulders above anything else in the industry, end quote. Personally, I think that 5 million units a year is really optimistic, but then again, I've learned that you don't bet against Elon Musk. The timelines are definitely completely ridiculous. The company is not known for getting new products out very quickly after they've announced something, i.e. the Cybertruck and the Roadster, the next generation Roadster. But eventually Tesla, and honestly every other company that Elon controls, Twitter being maybe an exception, they get it done when everybody else couldn't or said it could not be done at all. I can't think of any other person on the planet that is pushing and driving human advancement from a technological perspective forward as much as Elon is doing with his teams of incredible scientists, engineers, and others. And there are more stories to cover, including what I mentioned at the top of the show about a partnership between Tesla and Ford that was announced this week. Also, the Tesla Model Y is currently the best-selling vehicle in the world of any kind so far this year, and a few other Tesla stories that I'm going to be putting into episode 153. That being said, I wanted to finish recording this episode yesterday on Sunday the 28th, but that didn't happen. So that means that recording the next episode might not happen today, which is Memorial Day, but I am going to try. But before we get to all of that, we still have the question of the week, the EV Resource Hotline segment, and all the announcements coming up still right after this.
Hey guys, it's Matt Clausen, your host of the All Automotive Podcast. I've been in the automotive industry for over 30 years. I've owned my own repair shop for the last 15 years. I was going to write a book, but I started this podcast instead. So come join me for my take on vehicle extended service contracts or what to look for when purchasing a used vehicle. Like and subscribe to the All Automotive Podcast. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now.
All right, on then to the question of the week. This is the part of the show where I ask you a question related, usually, to a topic or news story mentioned in the episode and post a poll on the EV Resource Patreon page where all of you can vote for your answer and leave your thoughts in the comments. Last week, I asked if there was one thing you could do or change about the current progress that is being made to EV adoption that would speed up the process. What would it be and why? But I made a mistake and I never actually posted the question on the Patreon page. So my apologies. And as a result, I'm going to post that question. Actually, I already have, and I'll repeat it. And then also the question for this week's episode, what do you think is the best way for EV owners and drivers to pay their fair share of road use? I'm going to have both of them up on the Patreon page. They are there right now. So you can find that at patreon.com/EV resource. And another reminder, you do not have to be a Patreon supporter to participate. And while I do have a couple of answers to both that have been submitted already in the last few hours since I put them up, I'm going to let it ride for another week and see what you all come up with. So then on to the EV Resource Hotline segment. This is your chance to be featured on the podcast. All you have to do is call in and leave me your EV question, comment, or discussion topic. And it's super easy to do this. All you have to do is record your voice with either your smartphone's built-in voice recording software, or you can just record a video that has your voice on it and send that to me. You can email it to hello@ev-resource.com, and do please try to keep it to 90 seconds or less. This week, I don't have anyone that called in again, and so I'd like some feedback on this part of the show. I really would like to keep it going. This has potential to be one of my favorite parts of the podcast, and I think there's a lot of value in hearing your own voice or somebody else's voice asking a question or having a comment related to the podcast. So I really would like it to keep going, but that's going to depend on you guys, your part of it, to actually send me an audio message. So if you do have a question, comment, discussion topic, or anything else that you want to be featured in a future episode, go ahead and send that in to me. Before we end the show, I have a couple of thank yous and announcements. I want to thank, as always, the generous people who have signed up to be supporters of EV Resource via Patreon, especially those leading the way at the director tier, Rajiv Narayan and Andy Cooper, and at the executive producer tier, Chris Lawrence. Each of the tiers have stacked benefits, meaning the higher tiers add benefits on all of the lower tiers. And if you feel like I have earned your support and would like to access the benefits of being a Patreon supporter, including ad-free episodes of the podcast, you can head over to patreon.com/evresource and check it out. But also, because the podcast is free and will always be free, I rely on other financial support to keep things going. Patreon is one of those ways, but I've also partnered with a number of companies and organizations to provide deals for you. And when you purchase their products or services through my affiliate links and connections, those organizations support EV Resource. It's a way that you can get some awesome products, some of the best in the businesses, at potentially a discounted rate. This week, I want to highlight OhmU lithium-ion batteries. These are the best 12-volt accessory batteries on the market, and many times you will only ever have to install one of these batteries once. The chances of them outlasting the life of your car is pretty high, and they also outperform the traditional lead-acid batteries by far. You can check out the link in the show notes or go to the EV Resource webpage at ev-resource.com/deals. On the webpage, I also have a small shop section where I've gathered a number of products from Amazon, as well as a growing selection of EV Resource and Electric Vehicle Festival merch. And I will have an announcement about the EV Fest at the end of the next episode, number 153. So make sure you listen all the way to the end of that one. So that'll end it for the show for this week. Thank you so much, and don't go anywhere. I should have the next podcast episode, number 153, with the Tesla and Ford announcement and a few other things. I should have that published very shortly.